Now this story leads. The Africa Investment Forum, due to be held in Johannesburg this week, is expected to sell Africa as an investment destination for multinationals looking to grow their markets. Organizers say the forum is a unique transaction-oriented platform bringing together business people and policymakers. The forum is expected to present an opportunity for Africans to partner with global players and for public and the private sector collaboration to take the continent forward. Many African economies continue to primarily export raw material and import processed goods. Organizers say there is a recognition that it cannot be business as usual if the continent expects different results. It is expected that there will be major focus on small and medium enterprises, as there is recognition that they are the drivers of the economy to be able to create jobs. Well, the inaugural Africa Investment Forum takes place this week from Wednesday to Friday at the Sandton Convention Centre in Johannesburg. And to tell us more about what to expect, we are now joined in studio by Muziwethu Mathema, the Acting Group Executive of Trade, Investment and Regulatory Enablement at the Gauteng Growth and Development Agency, and Kapoor, the Director General at the African Development Bank. Gentlemen, a very good evening to you. Thank you so much for watching.
Good evening, Spain.
Muziwethu, I'm going to start with you. What should we expect from this conference?
So this conference is really around unveiling to Africa a new and alternative and innovative approach to financing infrastructure in deals within the continent. As you are aware, we as a continent have a very large infrastructure funding deficit. The African Development Bank estimates that from the 180 billion US dollar infrastructure funding that we require in the continent, we have a deficit of close to 80 billion per annum. And this is an innovative way to bring together institutional investors and funders to make sure that we do find an alternate way to fund that infrastructure gap.
All right. And now the big word during the rounds is that it should be business unusual. But then, is Africa ready for business?
I think Africa is very ready for business. I mean, if you look at the continent today, you're looking at a GDP of about $2 trillion plus, which is projected to grow to about $5 trillion over the next decade and a half. There's a very vibrant middle class. It's a growing middle class. It's demanding all kinds of commodities. Many countries are implementing series of reforms. You might be familiar with the Compact with Africa, which is a G20 Africa initiative under which a dozen African countries have implemented over the past 2 years about 100 reforms, as a result of which they've seen a huge increase in investment. So I think Africa is really ready. And it's actually the private sector which is saying to us, how do we enter into the investment space in Africa, and what is it that multilaterals can do to make it easier for the private sector to come in?
Muziwethu, is the regulatory framework conducive for Africa business to strive?
So there are key challenges around the ease of doing business. Certainly Africa does not punch as strong as it should compared to its European and the Western contemporaries. But within the ambit of the Gauteng provincial government, we have taken steps to greatly increase the ease of doing business in the Gauteng province. There's efforts at a national level as well. Overall, I think there's a lot of room for improvement around the African continent on how we can improve the ease of doing business. But the reality is, despite all that, there is still a very sound market and business case for projects to become bankable within the African context. And this forum presents that sort of business case.
Mr. Kapoor, what about the bottlenecks that exist between African countries and between African business people for them to continue trading with each other? And how do we deal with them?
So actually the approach we've taken is to do it one project at a time. I mean, you know, for a long time we've spoken in general terms. I think what we're trying to do, so take the Africa Investment Forum, which will start here tomorrow. We've identified approximately $200 billion worth of projects across the continent. We have over 300 investors, large, small, medium, who are getting together. And there's an array of projects in the energy space, in the transport space, medicine, education. Each sector faces a constraint. And so what we are doing is putting together a table where you've got senior government officials, you've got the financiers, you've got the multilateral development banks, you've got the project promoters, all sitting around the table and saying, right, what will success look like? What will it take to make this energy project a success? What are the legal challenges? What are the regulatory challenges? How do we deal with them? So through this transaction-based approach, we are trying to solve the problems one project at a time. And I think that's what makes this very different. Because you can try and implement a broad array of reforms and yet not get the kind of investments you need. It's much more effective to try and single out the projects, the investors, put them all together, and then try to resolve the issues they face.
Yeah, indeed. And the president of the African Development Bank said that, quote unquote, I don't want aid, I only want investment.
Absolutely.
I mean, the issue of the China factor comes into play. I mean, with talk of China, of the fact that China is on course to colonize the African continent. Where then do you strike the balance between aid and investment?
No, I mean, for me, you know, what is critically important is for Africa to be in the driver's seat and to talk about what it needs, for African governments to be in the driver's seat and have a very clear idea of what is it that their country needs. Then the next question is, how are those needs going to be financed?
True.
Who's going to finance them?
True.
And is that financing done in a transparent way? Is it done in an effective way? And are the citizens of those countries getting what they need? And you know, once you try and answer those questions, quite honestly, the color of money is not different irrespective of where it comes from. And I think that's what's important.
Isn't it time, and I want the both of you to respond to this question, isn't it time for African countries to scale back or scale down on trading with international bodies? For instance, the G20 Africa Summit has just passed in Germany, and then focus more resources towards intra-African trade. For instance, early this year, about 44 countries signed the Continental Free Trade Agreement, and Nigeria abstained from signing this particular agreement, saying that it undermines local business.
So the reality with intra-Africa trade is this. As a region, we have the lowest intra-regional trade globally. We trade at least 15% of our goods and services amongst each other. But if you look at that's just the quantity of trade. If you look at the quality of trade, there's very limited value-added goods that get traded amongst African states, and the bulk of value-added goods and services are traded with states from outside Africa. So in order for us to continually increase the level of intra-Africa trade, initiatives such as this, where we develop our capacity to industrialize and increase our appetite for value-added goods and producing value-added goods internally in the continent, will help drive that. So the time has come, but initiatives have to happen to make sure that happens. And those initiatives are around some of the bank's themes on feeding Africa, industrializing Africa, lighting up Africa, educating Africa, and integrating Africa. We as a Gauteng province also play a very critical role in driving inter-Africa trade. Part of our mandate is simply to make sure that Gauteng-based entities do expand their trade footprint throughout the African continent. We also play a particular role in making sure that we also play a key role in industrializing the continent, and key firms that have maybe at sunset phases within the Gauteng province, but are still in growth phases throughout the continent, are assisted in expanding. And that's why this partnership with the African Development Bank for us as a province has been very critical in meeting our mandate as a gateway to Africa.
Mr. Kapoor, do you agree with the popular sentiment that the current status quo should continue, that we should continue investing with the international bodies, because it has helped augment the development in the continent?
Well, I mean, firstly, I don't look at it as either or. I mean, you know, the fact of the matter is Africa does not trade enough amongst itself. 15% is very low. When you look at other parts of the world, you know, Europe is doing 60–70% within itself. Asia is doing about 50% plus within itself. Yes. Africa does 15%. So you've got to, you know, increase the amount of intra-regional trade. But that should not come at the expense of global trade. I mean, what one is finding is that you need to try and integrate your economies into the regional economy, into the global economy, and you need to get your particularly small and medium enterprises integrated into global value chains. Because what's happening is, if you look, whether it's an economy like India or the United States, much of the job creation comes from small and medium enterprises. And the way they have done it is by integrating the small and medium enterprises into these value chains. So SMEs feed into larger companies. These larger companies either service the region or they service the planet. You know, and this is a model that has worked very effectively, whether it's China or East Asian economies like Malaysia, Indonesia, Thailand, and so forth. And I think it's a model that can be replicable and taken to scale in the case of Africa as well.
And I guess there should be greater scrutiny so far as regulatory policies. I mean, what's the point of trying to get all the African countries to trade with each other, yet some of the countries, the policies, the investment policies or the political policies are not actually conducive for trading? What should be done?
I think you've hit the nail on the head. The policy environment, from my vantage point, is the single most important driver of investment and growth.
Yes.
If there are insufficiently effective policies in place, private investment will not come in. Earlier on, I had mentioned the Compact with Africa, which is a G20 initiative. And what we found was that the Compact countries, which are 12 countries so far, have actually seen an increase in investment because they implemented over 100 reforms at a time when FDI was declining in the rest of the continent. So there's a clear correlation and a perception among the investors that they want to go where the policy environment, the regulatory environment, the legal environment, the macro environment are all conducive for business. So what you say is absolutely critical.
Yeah.
If those reforms don't happen, the investment will not come. And if the investment doesn't come, jobs will not be created. So there's a clear linkage between all of these things.
All right. Now, Muziwethu, I mean, we all know that infrastructure is the backbone of each and every economy. How much of resources should be channeled towards improving and augmenting the infrastructure on the continent?
As I said earlier, research shows that we require close to 180 billion as a continent in resources, and we have a deficit of close to 90 to 100 billion. So that really answers the question. We need close to 180 billion, and we only are able to raise, in the current status quo, at least 100 billion of that. But the bigger reality is, if you look at the amount of assets sitting with institutional investors globally, it's close to 100 trillion. So the reality is, a small fraction of the funds which are sitting with institutional investors and pension funds globally and within Africa are capable of addressing our needs to feed Africa, to industrialize Africa, to light up Africa, to educate Africa. And why we need to take initiatives, or why we've taken initiatives such as this, in 2030, which is 4,500 days from today, there will be at least 2 billion people in this continent. At least 60% of those people be young people that need social mobility, that need education, that need employment.
Okay.
Yeah, and we will not achieve that if we don't find the innovative ways to finance.
Indeed.
Yeah.
You know, the proverbial elephant in the room is the fact that most, if not all, African countries export their raw materials and then import processed goods. Do we have the capacity to start processing our own raw materials and then export them as processed goods, or is it just a pie in the sky?
Well, there's absolutely no reason whatsoever why you shouldn't have the capacity. It's not rocket science. Country after country has done this. What is important is the point that you made earlier. Are the policies in place that would encourage value addition? You know, our headquarters is based in Abidjan, and Côte d'Ivoire is one of the world's largest producer of cocoa. And yet, as you said, the cocoa is completely exported and is sold to the rest of the world in terms of chocolate. Chocolate is about an $85 billion industry globally, and what cocoa producers get is maybe 6 to 7 billion, so about 10% of that. So clearly adding value is critical. And you know, the know-how exists, the skills exist. It can easily be done. What is critical are the policies and the regulatory environment in place. Because what happens is that the investor who wants to come in and put in place the factories that will translate your cocoa into chocolate wants a stable political environment, wants a predictable policy environment, wants a financial sector that is deep enough to service their needs. They're ticking many of the boxes. And once you can give them that environment, which more and more countries on the continent are beginning to do, I see absolutely no reason why such value addition cannot take place.
He mentioned the value add, he mentioned the technical know-how, but then is Africa ready? Does Africa have the capacity to produce, or rather to refine or process its own raw materials?
I'll tell you what we've done in the Gauteng province. We have a special economic zone around the OR Tambo area. And in that special economic zone, we've targeted exactly that, mineral beneficiation and value addition. We are currently in the process of actually rolling out a jewelry manufacturing processing plant within that special economic zone for beneficiation purposes in the jewelry manufacturing business. So the short answer is yes. The long answer is certain steps have to be taken around regulatory environment. That's why that jewelry manufacturing precinct is actually based within a special economic zone as well.
Okay.
Yeah.
All right. Gentlemen, thank you so much for your time. We appreciate it.
Thank you for your time.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
All right. This is The Globe on SABC News.